Ambassador Butler, welcome to the Unfair Fight. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Happy afternoon to you.
Yeah, likewise. I know this was a long time in planning, but I don't think the timing could have worked out better with your expertise and the unfortunate events we've seen with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And for those that don't know, Ambassador Butler is a 40-year career civil servant with the Department of State, long-time career ambassador and deputy commander of EUCOM, and I know a wealth of experience and history that I think can help inform us. And obviously with this show, we like to kind of talk about that intersection of, national security, geopolitics, and kind of cyber activities and kind of the asymmetric role, role that cyber can play in any sort of conflict. So, first off, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I know you're on the road. I won't say where, but I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, pleasure's mine. Thank you. Let's get to it.
All right, good stuff. So obviously, you had a really long and storied career. I mean, everything from serving in Iraq, Bulgaria, touring all over Africa. I'd be really curious, what was the first time you kind of witnessed the impact of the cyber domain on diplomacy, even if it was kind of, pre-internet times, whether it was IO? I think, a lot of cyber is such a great IO delivery weapon in addition to disruption. It'd be fascinating to hear your thoughts.
Probably the first time that I witnessed it up close and personal was in Bulgaria, when it was a communist country. So, part of the Warsaw Pact. People laughingly refer to Bulgaria as the 16th Republic of the Soviet Union when it rained in Moscow. Umbrellas came out in Sofia. My job there at the time was to keep high technology out of the hands of the Warsaw Pact, and specifically out of the hands of the Bulgarians. And we're pretty damned effective at it. But I had one senior Bulgarian official, communist, sort of pull me aside one day and says, "Hey, I want to thank you for embargoing computers and stuff like that." It says, because now we have the monopoly in the Warsaw Pact to produce computers, and we've just he was really proud of this. We've just reversed engineered an Apple IIc, and we're producing it for the Warsaw Pact. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. There's a lot of speculation that the first computer virus came out of Bulgaria because they then turned the operating system over to high school kids and said, think what trouble you guys can make. But simultaneous to that going on, and this is the IO, the information, called the information warfare, if you would, the Bulgarians had a ethnic problem. Their ethnic Turkish minority was growing too fast, and their Bulgarian majority was not. It was staying static. And without going into sort of the details, they had too many Turks, not enough Bulgarians for their annual conscription. So they decided, well, we're just going to change their names, and we're going to wave a hand and say, call them all Bulgarians, not ethnic Turkish Bulgarians. It did not go over well with the ethnic Turkish population, but the Bulgarians had to come up with a narrative about these guys were forcibly converted from being Bulgarian to being Turks under the Ottoman, the 500 years of Ottoman rule. And that narrative, stuck for a while, and we had to do the counter narrative. How do we puncture that one, blow holes in it, and get them to stop it? So, fast forward to I'm going to use cyber and an impact on diplomacy during the 93, 94, 95, 96 conflict in Bosnia. I was the acting ambassador for all intents and purposes in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. And there was a guy the abbot, the head of a monastery of a Serbian Orthodox monastery in Kosovo, whose nickname was the Cyber Monk. The guy was incredibly active on the internet with his narrative, pushing it out. And that was just really interesting because, as you know, Kosovo is no longer part of Serbia. It declared independence, although some countries don't recognize it. But it's just interesting to see how effective he was able to push his message out, and then it was kind of ran counter to the negative messaging over what the Serbs are doing in Bosnia. The third thing was when our friends the Russians decided to express their displeasure to the Lithuanians I think in 2007, who wanted to take down a Soviet era statue of a Red Army soldier that was stood in the middle of Tallinn. They took it down, moved it over to a cemetery, very respectful. And the Russians unleashed a DDoS, distributed denial of service attack, which shut down a country which had already gone full cyber. I mean, it was, e-government was a thing and is a thing. And all these guys kind of skipped a generation. There's no paperwork there. It's all done electronically. And that was a wake up call for everybody of like, oof, what are we going to do now? So number one thing for me is the high ground is the narrative, and he or she or it who controls the narrative, really is one who's going to prevail at the end of the day in most cases. So, I got to Ireland directly from Belgrade, where I spent 2 years dealing with Milosevic. So I was very, very used to dealing with people who are like on FBI's, most wanted terrorists, sealed indictment for war crimes. And that's something that the taxpayer asks us to do you got to talk to the guys with the guns and the bad people if you want to get things done. And my reward for 2 years of helping get the Dayton Accords was, I asked to go to Ireland because I thought it would be a peaceful, relaxing, quiet place for my family, me and 2 dogs, just to chill out after, 3 really hard years of dealing with, Balkan conflicts and genocide. So I arrive, as this is, again, you've heard me say this once, and I'll say it over and over, it's better to be lucky than good. So I showed up, basically as things were coming together, especially in the IO sphere, in the narrative sphere, about what convinced the parties to put the guns aside and sign up to something which for the Irish Republican Army basically says we're giving up our goal to forcibly unify the 6 counties in Northern Ireland with the rest of the Republic of Ireland, and what would allow the Protestant paramilitaries and the political parties and number 10 Downing Street, London, to agree to an accommodation where Sinn Féin and others would have a seat at the table in a newly elected parliament up in Northern Ireland. And here's what led up to it. There were a couple of things. One, and this is going to sound really funny, the moral authority of the Catholic Church in Ireland had gotten shattered because of a horrific pedophile scandal that undercut sort of what the church was telling the people in the South. That was one. 2, and I got this from Jerry Adams himself, over whiskey on the second floor of the White House on St. Patrick's Day in 1998, when they were had signed up for it, and it was Larry. I don't want my grandkids to have to keep plowing the same road that I've been plowing for my entire life. It's time to change things. The third thing, this is the narrative. The narrative for the North, which was dominated by the Protestant factions, was that the South was church-ridden, poor, and the only thing that they ever produced were Irishmen who were exported, out to the United States. Translation: people emigrated away because there was no economic opportunity in the South. Sure. The Celtic Tiger had kicked into high gear by 1996, 97. Whether it was, Irish pubs showing up in every major city in the world. Riverdance, has conquered, broad.
That's right. I forgot about that.
The Corrs, are holding, string after string of number 1 hits, on the top 10. And the Irish had changed their investment regimes so that American companies were investing in manufacturing facilities. Plus, there was the equivalent of it was Irish version of the city of London. It became a financial hub. And so you had economic growth and prosperity like no one had ever seen. And in 1990, so I got there in 96. 1997 was the first year there was net migration into Ireland. The Irish were coming home. Oh, by the way, Poles and East Europeans were coming to Ireland too because there were jobs. It was incredible. Right. And so this narrative of we're better than you was blown out of the water. Well, now you have traffic jams with Mercedeses, Rolls Royces, and Ferraris in Dublin. And up in North, the place is poor. It's going downhill, and it's going downhill in a hurry. So the moral high ground was gone. The protagonists had gotten old. And then the key thing was John Major, who had been the prime minister, will never get credit for it, but he was the one that set in motion that, okay, we're going to negotiate and we're going to cut a deal with these guys. But his majority in the parliament were 10 seats, and that was the Northern Irish Protestant parties. So if he did something they didn't like, he was out of office. Well, there were elections. Tony Blair came in with a supermajority, and he was more than ready to go cut a deal. And it was a combination of Bill Clinton, being there for the folks in the South, because this required, the off-ramp was for the South to accept that the North is going to stay part of the United Kingdom.
Right.
And the IRA was going to put its guns down and replace the ballot with for their AK-47s, which was, again, kind of startling to see that. And up in the North, the Protestants suddenly are like, well, we can go march around during the marching season, April, May, June, celebrating victories that when we vanquished the Catholics 400 years ago. But the Brits are flying to Dublin for bachelor parties, and they're not coming up north here. We've lost the moral high ground, and it was just an incredible. It was an incredible change of events, and it was really all the narrative, and it was all the pictures, and something like, wait a minute, we want to be like them, and that's what cracked it. So you had to have the right people. This is Clinton, Major, followed by Blair, the people that work for them. And then, quite frankly, guys who are on FBI's terrorist list, taking chances of putting down the gun. So, that's how that happened.
So prosperity, opportunity, it's actually something I would love to do an episode on this. I think a lot of times when we look at our entertainment industry, sometimes they have wacky theories on the world and life and politics, but I don't think, it struck me following targets, in our previous life, how much they loved kind of Western music and entertainment. And to me, I actually think sometimes it's not all great, but I do think it is such a powerful national security export. I would love to do an episode with you and kind of a celebrity from the entertainment space, because I just used to be shocked. I'm like, here I'm going after what we thought was a hardened guy, and he's just all loving Justin Timberlake and his latest music. And, it was really, really, it was really powerful moment for me personally when I realized, man, this is a huge export.
RFE, Radio Free Europe, and Radio Liberty, they're number one. They were incredibly popular in the Soviet Union for their jazz programs.
Really?
Russians loved and fell in love, and this is the 60s and 70s, with listening. There's one particular guy had a program that was like the most listened to program. Cultural, let's call it cultural imperialism. The attractiveness of Western music and culture, it cannot be undersold. Having said that, watching the rebirth of and the fact that European and even Russian film and music has risen up and given a lot of inspiration.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, it can almost go a little too far where people start to resent it and kind of want the old traditions back. But I do think it's such an incredible export that I don't think we give enough credit to in the national security circles. How about that? It's something that's never talked about, and I was always kind of struck by it. In fact, funny aside, I might have told you this previously, but back when I worked for the government, we're like normal young govies. My wife and I were both work for the government, and we tried to do something special. She loves tennis, so we took her down to see this tennis tournament in Florida. And now I'm an ex, Division I player, not very good anymore. But I got a call, from the front desk, and they said, Senator Mitchell was curious if you'd like to play tennis. And I was like, of course, I had to Google quickly, and then was quickly embarrassed that I had to Google. And I believe he had a big part in the Good Friday agreements too, in my understanding. But we got to spend an awesome day and rest of the evening together. It was kind of a wildly small world that sports brought together. Again, another fantastic export, I think, from the national security side.
George, Senator Mitchell, who's from Maine, my home state, was the lead negotiator, and just stayed at it and stayed at it and stayed at it. You cannot underplay or underestimate the value of having somebody who has the ability to talk and listen and convey respect. And that was George Mitchell.
Yeah, he was fantastic for the limited time I spent with him. Obviously, kind of switching gears to, near the neighborhood we're dealing with now on your kind of involvement of, the Dayton Accords. Obviously, that was another one that didn't seem to have an exit ramp. And I'm curious, how'd you approach high level negotiations with someone such as Milosevic? Obviously, I think a lot of these successful diplomatic resolutions to nasty conflicts, it's, with this Russia thing, that's all we have to really go off of. There's obviously hard power and there's diplomatic power, and you've clearly had a career that has been very skilled at getting results. How did you handle that one? What corollaries do you see with the current predicament the world finds itself in, if any?
Yeah, and there are small problems and there are big problems. And one of the things I had to do with Milosevic is to develop a personal relationship with him, which meant going to his place, whether his official residence or his office, and having it started with coffee in his office, because I'd be instructed by Washington to go in and tell him something, and then it was lunch, and then it was dinner. And then episodically we would have senior negotiators come to Belgrade, as one of the things we realized is that the Europeans were simply incapable of sustaining a negotiating effort to stop the violence in Bosnia. I mean, that was a tragedy. Henry Kissinger was once quoted as having responded to somebody said, well, we should get the Europeans to do it. And Kissinger's response was, Europe, what's its number? I mean, what's the 911 number for Europe? Because that was back in '93.
Sure.
The European Union was an economic entity. It wasn't the political, and now trending into military, it is now.
Right.
So we'd have these very senior people would fly in, and it was everything from Bill Richardson, the former senator from New Mexico, who flies around and gets Americans out of the Huskows in various horrible countries. Jimmy Carter, came by once, and everybody had this idea that if he could just talk to Slobodan Milosevic, he would tell the Bosnian Serbs what to do, and it would all be good. And one of the things you have to understand, I just heard the interview of the journalist who has run the profile of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia in the Atlantic, which is catching a lot of flack in the Washington Post.
I haven't seen that.
You should read it. It's a profile of him,
of MBS,
and it's Mohammed bin Salman, and it's I won't call it favorable, but it's not negative. Right. But one of I was listening to this guy on, I can't remember the individual's name. I heard him on NPR, where he was saying that, what's the word I'm looking for? Like craven killers, you can sometimes be the most charming people on the planet.
Right.
And so he fessed up and said that, if you talk to MBS, he will just talk, as the most urbane, sophisticated, nicest guy you ever wanted to talk to. That was Slobodan Milosevic.
Really?
And the example I'll give you is that after Dayton was signed, and before we committed troops to I-4, the implementation force that came in to separate the warring parties in Bosnia from each other, Congress wanted to see for themselves on the ground. So we had several relays of congressmen who come out, and I remember one notable flew into Belgrade, and we all loaded him up in a minibus to take them over to talk to Milosevic and his foreign minister, and they were all talking about how they would not shake his hand. They would not smile. They would put on their game face. The only thing they didn't do was Braveheart. With stripes.
Everyone's hardened.
Everyone's hardened. Well, by the end of the meeting, they're like doing selfies with him. And,
are you kidding me?
He had, he had them eating out of the palm of his hand by the end of the meeting. It was, and then on the way out, I kind of lingered just to shoo them all back out in the bus, and I heard him turn to his foreign minister and say, in Serbian, I speak Serbian, he goes, they're like small children. Like, okay.
He's working them the whole time.
He worked them. He oozed charm. He'd worked in Wall Street as a banker at some point in the 70s. So he had dated American slang, so he'd roll that out like, "Oh, that's all baloney," and and we eat this stuff up because he sounds like us, he kind of looks like us, despite the fact he's a dictator and he's partially responsible for the genocide that happened in Srebrenica and many other places. And so understanding him and developing the relationship where I could actually talk to him directly did the equivalent of what we call operational preparation of the environment. I basically set the stage for when we finally took it seriously and sent the big guns in. And the big gun was Richard Holbrooke. And Richard was, at that point, was the Assistant Secretary for European Affairs. He was on vacation in Colorado when Srebrenica happened. We had the slaughter of 7,000 men and boys, just unconscionable.
Brutal.
And he flies in. He's now doing shuttle diplomacy. So his job is to deal with three thugs. Quite frankly, Izetbegovic in Sarajevo is not a thug. Tudjman in Croatia defended his country, but trust me, a lot of thuggishness there. And then an honest to God war criminal, Milosevic. Right. But I'm the guy that's got to tee this up and make sure that everything is prepared, everything is right, that we know what
he's prepped to talk, right?
He's prepped to talk. So, and this is where soft power. Think of a rheostat where over here it's this is soft power, over here is hard power, and then we dial between. Admiral Stavridis was one of my bosses at EUCOM. Like to roll that out there. Except I always say diplomacy. It's never on or off for diplomacy. Diplomacy is always on. The question is it in the front or is it running in the background?
Right.
And what was running in parallel, which helped our cause, was an arm and equip of the Bosniaks and the Croats was turning the tide of battle against the Bosnian Serbs.
Interesting.
And Butler's got a theory that, quite frankly, Dayton came maybe too early. Maybe if we, so what happened was we came in. I'm not sure I understand. We came in and we told Milosevic that if the Bosnian Serbs didn't break the siege around Sarajevo, we were going to break it for them. And then you may recall this in August, we said, we're just going to hit every heavy weapon on the hills and the mountains surrounding Sarajevo. Sarajevo is down in a bowl surrounded by pretty big mountains.
Right.
And we did, but we signaled in advance because we wanted to minimize collateral damage. We did not want to kill anybody. And This is one of my adages is for every person you kill on the other side, you created 10 more enemies.
Their whole family.
The family, the colleagues, their best man, all the rest of this good stuff. So we, and Milosevic watched, with intently as one at a time, our F-16s with JDAMs, precision guided munitions, just took out heavy weapons, and then it was okay, cried uncle. The Bosnian Serbs understood what was happening. They saw that the tide was turning on the battlefield on the conventional side. They saw that NATO, led by the United States, was finally, set aside this pretense that this is, United Nations, we're like taking sides in this fight. Same thing is happening in Ukraine right now, except we're not directly involved. So the narrative changed. And the narrative change was because the narrative up until that moment, you may recall this, was during World War II, 90 Nazi divisions had been tied down by Tito in Yugoslavia. Remember that? This was the myth of Tito and the partisans, and that reality was never true. There were never first-line Nazi divisions in Yugoslavia. It was a mishmash of Italians and Bulgarians and second-line units. But that I remember, and I had personally an argument with a 4-star deputy commander at U.S. European Command, and this was in '90, before the bombing campaign, where he said air power could never make a difference in Bosnia. Well, guess what? Air power made a difference because there was a land component that we had nothing to do with other than the arm, the train and equip or the arm and equip, and let them go do their own fighting, which is very similar to what's happening in Ukraine right now. That narrative popped. The invincibility and the willingness of Yugoslavs to resist, was no longer there. The war was going against them, and suddenly they essentially sued for peace. And this is where I thought, if we'd waited another month, so there was a ceasefire which caused the bombing to stop. And then everybody, then we had the Holbrooke is now is on airplanes going between Zagreb and Sarajevo and Belgrade. And it results with everybody going to Wright Pat Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, where they were all locked up and not allowed out until they came up with an agreement. And so that's what it was. It was changing the narrative. And the narrative of the invincible Serb was no longer. And this is the IO piece I think we're seeing in Ukraine right now. I know we're going to get there eventually.
Right. Sure, of course.
The pictures that came out from Srebrenica of bodies with arms sticking out of the dirt overwhelmed international opinion. And that's what finally caused President Clinton, and this is an interesting thought, this was called the CNN effect. Bill Clinton was very concerned after Black Hawk Down. The pictures on CNN of the two American soldiers being dragged through the streets of Mogadishu horrified him, and he didn't have the stomach to risk American forces again. Right. And he was just convinced that we'll lose another American aircraft or another Black Hawk Down, and we'll be humiliated, and then Americans will be revolted. We don't have a piece of it. Well, his reluctance finally broke because of what came out of Srebrenica. We worked very hard to develop hard evidence that Srebrenica was a real thing and not something, some urban myth of zombies walking through, walking at nighttime. We had the pictures, we had the overhead, we had survivors. I personally took FBI forensic experts into a place near Srebrenica where they collected literally flesh samples that were blown onto walls and stuff like that, and we were able to knit it together. And this was kind of still coming together. And then you had Christiane Amanpour, the CNN reporter, who our nickname for her was Angel of Death. Back in the 90s, if Christine Amanpour was in your AOR, bad things were happening.
She's fantastic. I mean, her coverage is unbelievable.
And then you had Samantha Power, who's currently the head of the administrator for the U.S. Agency for International Development. She was a journalist who was also just getting the word out. So as I said, we dominated the narrative. World opinion changed, but combined with events on the ground changing stuff. That's how Dayton came about. It's worth another podcast to talk about, the long-term impact of Dayton. The bottom line up front on that one is it was good enough to stop a war, but not good enough to create a viable country.
Hence the maybe a little too early. Is that where you're thinking on that?
It's a place for the Russians to get up to mischief with right now, because you have a Bosnian Serb entity which is quasi-independent, building its own army, kind of working with Belgrade right now. And this is, for the Russians, it's just tailor-made for a little bit of mischief and mayhem and distract the rest of us.
Yeah, no, it seems to be teeing up that way. So that's really interesting. So both the Good Friday and Dayton, big information component and shining a light, right? And obviously that, and so, we're obviously going to get to Ukraine, Russia, and some of the cyber impacts there. But, you also spent a significant amount of time in Iraq. And, I think the first two examples are really interesting lesson learned on how to generate an off-ramp, right? Right. And clearly information and shining light on what's actually going on, trying to combat the disinformation or propaganda that's pushed within the offending country. Is a key part of it. Iraq was different, where it was kind of American firsthand experience with a massive counterinsurgency. Maybe there's some corollaries that what the Russians might or are finding themselves in, right now. Talk to us a little bit about kind of your experience there, maybe some lessons learned, from that must have been a tough post, I'd have to think. Up front, I was happily ensconced as the American ambassador to the country now known as North Macedonia when the war went down. I saw it coming because we had active duty regular American divisions up in Kosovo as part of the KFOR. Suddenly they were replaced by National Guard units. And I'm thinking, that's interesting. I wonder where the First Infantry Division, Big Red One, went, and why we have the Pennsylvania Guard here. Who, by the way, that was actually no issue there because they were very, very good. But again, it was kind of like, something's going on.
And then, kind of, quick editorial comment was, and this, I think there's some similarities. I'm kind of leading the question before we get to Ukraine. Some similarities to Ukraine of we Washington had an attitude that we didn't actually need to plan for the post-invasion because 1,000 flowers were going to bloom in the desert, and once Saddam Hussein was gone, it was going to be fine. It was no issue. So the insurgency comes on. So I move up. I spent my 2 years in Macedonia, where I had to deal with an ethnic insurgency, where I had to work with the government of Macedonia plus the ethnic Albanian population to reach an accommodation where I made sure that they got seats at the table. That changed the narrative of it's no longer us versus them. We're all at the table, and we're all dividing up the pie. We'll set the corruption piece of it by, but that's what happens in what I call post-communist societies. They have no experience with liberal democracies and economies and understanding contract law and stuff like that. That's a longer-term challenge. So I went up to Bosnia. So for my sins of having been part of Dayton, I was asked to go be the number 2 in the Office of the High Representative, which is a UN-linked organization responsible for administering a big part of Bosnia. Did that for 2 years. I got a phone call out of nowhere saying, "Hey, you're coming back." This was December 2006. You're coming back to Washington, and you're going to be the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Iraq. And much to my astonishment, because one, I've never served in the Middle East up until then. I could spell Iraq, find it on a map, but why me? And the answer was there were very few people in the State Department who had experience with successful post-conflict political, military diplomacy. Right. At this point, I'm now speaking various dialects of military because I'm dealing with the Army, I'm dealing with the Air Force, I'm dealing with special operations. I'm working with Joint Forces Command and the NATO command that's in Naples. I'm up in Stuttgart talking to U.S. European Command. So I'm very familiar with them, and they're familiar with me, and we work very well together. So the idea was the civilian surge, which was corresponded to the 15 brigade combat teams that we sent to Iraq as part of the surge. Each one of them had a civilian component called a provincial reconstruction team that was embedded. Now, so here's the narrative piece of it, and here's how we changed things and why we went from the horrific levels of violence that we experienced in January 2007, where American soldiers were being killed, Iraqis are being killed, Al-Qaeda is running, wreaking havoc. We've got suicide bombers that are flowing through Syria.
The headings is brutal.
And then we've got Shia militia, Bin Sadr is the Sadrists are doing their things. I mean, it's really not working out well, and this is where we have to sit back and think, okay, what's the narrative look like right now? How do we change it? Right. And this is where, again, it's the third time you've heard me say it: better to be lucky than good. Right. Except the goodness came from what happened in Anbar province. And the Marines, along with some friends, I'm not going to go into details on the friends, right. And I'm going to cite the one-star Marine general who I would follow him anywhere he wanted me to go. Put me in his, in a CH-4, a mini version of a Chinook, flew me out to Ramadi and Fallujah, and I spent a day understanding from him what his Marines were doing, together with the PRTs, the provincial reconstruction teams that I was responsible for providing to him to engage the Sunni tribes. John Allen was on a first name basis with every sheikh in Anbar.
That's unbelievable. I never knew this. This is fascinating.
And here's what made that happen. The Marines were only in country for 6 months at a time. Mm-hmm. And they would rotate back to Konis or wherever they came from, and then they would go back to the same place they'd been. So there was repetitive relationship building, and what I heard from General Allen, who went on to get 4 stars, was that Baghdad, which was controlled by Nouri al-Maliki and the Shia parties, was starving the Anbar provinces of the resources they needed to provide legitimate governance, civil governance. Right. Well, we fixed that. We started making sure that money flowed to the provincial councils and the different municipalities so that the Sunni leaders out there legitimately could say, we're delivering essential services, we're taking care of you. Simultaneously, we had the Sahwa, the so-called awakening. So you suddenly had Sunni tribesmen who were putting uniforms on, carrying guns, and providing local security against al-Qaeda.
Right.
So that changed that dynamic dramatically. So that was 2007, 2008, and this is where Ryan Crocker was American ambassador, plus David Petraeus were the best buddies you could possibly have hoped for. And in the case of Ryan Crocker, and I know David would kick me, right where it hurts the most if he listens to this one.
He might. I don't know.
Yeah, well, David and I have a good relationship, but this might end it. Ryan Crocker let David have Ryan Crocker's way early and often. You tracking that?
Yep.
Crocker never said no to anything Petraeus wanted to do, but he would guide him and plant the seeds of what right looked like. Okay. I only knew of one case where Ryan Crocker said no to something Petraeus wanted to do, and because that was careful as and this is making sure, because the military was in the lead. The military was bleeding and taking all the risks. We were, the embassy, they had, happy hours, around the pool on Thursday and Friday night. I mean, where the military was not. So, so that was, a remarkable. But then part of my job was when I wasn't flying out to Baghdad. So I was in Baghdad every 2 months for a week at a time, going to different provincial capitals to see what was going on. When I was back in Washington, when I wasn't testifying on the Hill and otherwise, I had a terrific staff that actually understood the Middle East and Iraq. So I didn't have to worry about the subject matter experts. My job was to be the face of Washington, working for Condi Rice and Jim Jeffrey, who was not Jim Jeffrey, David Satterfield, who was her special coordinator for Iraq. And there were some other terrific people that deserve to be named, but probably don't want to be right. But then on the public diplomacy side of it, this is the cyber side, the information narrative side, we had a domestic problem. And the domestic problem was every newspaper had a story every day about how bad it was going to Iraq. Right. And so I got on an airplane and I had a public diplomacy officer who set up a speaking tour for me, which ranged from going up to talking in New York, out to Michigan, and out to Los Angeles, where I was talking to CAIR, the Council of Americans of Islamic out of the West Coast, including of all places like Berkeley. I'm working for President Bush on Iraq, and I'm at Berkeley on a
Can't imagine you were welcomed.
Well, they were surprisingly polite out there. But in Michigan, my host out there, he says, Larry says, how you have a metric for how we will know when we're succeeding in Iraq? And I said, when Iraq isn't on the front page of the New York Times. Yeah. Because those days, New York Times was running a blurb on the front page every day with the names of every American who died, in the previous day. It was dispiriting. At the State Department, I was shunned by my colleagues. When I walked, I had one guy, a guy was I consider one of my closest friends, walked up to me and he looked at me and he says, well, I suppose if they give you the Nobel Peace Prize, they can't take it away from you. And then he kept walking. Wow. No, it was poison. It was plutonium. Nobody wanted to touch Iraq in 2007 because it was a losing cause. The Iranians were feeding in EFPs like crazy, making an absolute mess. The EFPs had just been being rolled out then, and they were just ripping through our tanks. And again, it was just like Assad al-Haq was kidnapping American soldiers and murdering them, and it was game on for us. Which is probably what it's going to be like for the Russians in Ukraine over time, as they're going to find out to their dismay. So about 2 months later, so that was kind of I'm trying to think that it was October, November of 2007. I was out at Michigan. I timed my trip out there for the Michigan-Ohio State game. Yeah, man's got to do it. Solid move. I went to graduate school, the MBA from Michigan, so I had a reason to go there. Plus, it was a great place where we could, because there's a lot of Arab Americans in the Michigan area, especially in the Detroit area. So it was a good audience to address and get the word out. About 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from the guy, Mel Levitsky, and he goes, Larry, have you read the Washington Post today? The New York Times? They go, no, it's just Iraq's not on it. And I had to go grab a copy of it. And I said, guys, guess what? We apparently are succeeding. The J curve of things get worse before they get better is succeeding. Casualties are down. New York Times apparently doesn't think Iraq merits space on the front page.
On the front page.
On the front page. But along the way, there were some goddamn things going on, and which picked up. So that was my first time in Iraq. So I did that for 18 months, and now we're into 2008, and I have for somebody who spends most of his life overseas studying other people's political systems. We're not very good about our own political systems, but you're looking at somebody who, suddenly decided I need to understand what's going on in my country. And I figured George Bush is not a very popular president. I can't remember. It says, there's this guy named Obama who looks like he's going to get the Democratic nomination, and I've now been twice a Bush appointee, once as ambassador, another time as a deputy assistant secretary. I was up on the Hill getting roasted by Nancy Pelosi and others because I had to defend the administration's position, and it was unpopular. Just like the Republicans are doing to Biden today, the Democrats did it to Bush back then.
Of course.
And I'm a professional. It's like, don't get mad. They're just doing it because that's what they do, and I'm a convenient target. And I figured it's time for Larry Butler to get the hell out of Dodge.
Right.
In my career, I was never, ever in Washington in a change of government.
Really?
Somehow I had to go back and look at it, and it goes, wow, I was never there when we had a transition from, from one president to another president. Timing's everything. So I happened to bump into the SACEUR, the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, the commander of NATO forces, also dual-hatted as the EUCOM commander at the time, John Craddock. And he bumps into me in the State Department. This is in June 2008. He goes, Larry, are you free? Would you like to be my political advisor, my POLAD? This is the senior State Department person that 4-star generals have who give them foreign policy advice. And they go,
sure.
Oh, yeah. Belgium? It's like, I can get out from under the shit I've been dealing with from the Congress because the Democrats had both houses, sign me up. So literally 4 weeks later, I'm in Belgium. But guess what I've just done? I've traded Iraq for Afghanistan.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, so I did too.
More to come.
I wrote a piece for Obama's transition team, which they acted on some of it. I'd had 6 months of going to Afghanistan. Again, every 6 weeks we went to Afghanistan. And again, I was looking at the narrative and I was trying to draw the comparisons to Iraq. So let's fast forward to 2 years of working in Afghanistan plus Russia, where we're trying to be nice to them. But, we've had some issues. We've had the 2007 DDoS attack, and which is like, and the Baltics are all nervous as hell. We're still dealing with Kosovo, which is still a NATO mission, and we have the Eastern countries that we're still trying to become part of NATO. Fully adapt to being NATO allies and some partners. And I got a phone call from a guy who sounds like this, Larry. You're coming with me to Iraq. Well, if you've ever met General Lloyd Austin, who's 6'5" and has this
not
deep bass voice, you don't mess with him. When Lloyd tells you you're going somewhere with him, you just so salute and say, "Yes, sir." But I'm a chicken shit. I said, "Could you call my wife and tell her that I'm being drafted?"
Back to Iraq.
And he goes, "What?" And he goes, "I've been married for like 35 years. My wife is not going to understand that I'm about to leave her for a year." Okay, right. I'm in Iraq, and I'm working for Lloyd Austin. And now this is the kind of what is at this point. It's kind of like, wow, it's like pretty damn peaceful. Things are going well with the Kurds up in Erbil, up in Kurdistan.
Yep.
We're not getting whacked by Shia. The Shia militias, the Sunnis are pretty much all happy, but we're drawing down.
Right.
And this is, I have to hit Obama on this one. So the narrative is pretty good. This is all good, but there's a little bit of a problem. The American embassy decided, for its infinite wisdom, that Nouri al-Maliki, whose party had lost the presidential election earlier in 2010, they decided for some reason that they wanted to help him get a second term as prime minister, even though somebody else in theory, had the right to pull pull a government together, kind of in opposition to al-Maliki.
Sure.
And as they say, let's fast forward to 2-3 years later, the Iraqi army crumbles, with ISIS rolling down.
And that's ISIS. That's the birth.
And that was because all the work we had done to bolster the standing of the legitimate leaders of the Sunni population, plus we had made sure that Iraqi generals and officers had been brought back in the Iraqi army because they were the only ones that actually had military experience.
Right.
That all went away when Barack Obama decided not to leave anybody behind, not even a training equipped element. As we went out, we discovered quickly. There's a line I like to use. There's a golf commercial. I can't remember if it's Nike or who, with Tiger Woods from like maybe 10, 15 years ago. And there's 5 guys on the driving range hitting the balls, and they're not doing a real good job. I mean, the balls are going up, backwards, sideways. And then Tiger walks up to the end of the line where, and then puts down his bag of, his bucket of balls and starts hitting the ball, 300 yards down range. Within 3 swings, everybody is hitting it just like Tiger down the range. He hits his last ball, picks up his bucket, walks away, and within 2 swings, they're all back to what they were doing before.
Right. Yeah.
So, one of our problems is we try to make other people's armies in our own image, except that that's not authentic. That's what happened in Afghanistan. So, interesting IO thing. There was a Palestinian American doctor in the Detroit area who started this narrative of we had poisoned the people of Iraq with depleted uranium in the Battle of Fallujah.
Wow. Okay. I don't remember this, actually.
Oh, you can Google this. And there was a similar thing that still pops up periodically, that we also did the same thing with depleted uranium bombs in Serbia, and that there are increased rates of cancer due to this radioactive stuff that we are responsible for. Well, a couple of things for your listeners is there's no such thing as a depleted uranium bomb.
I was just going to say, my background's pretty strong in the nuke side. So
it's a 2.5-inch bullet with depleted uranium. Depleted means it's no longer radioactive. Its radioactivity has been used up, but it's heavy.
Yeah, very dense. And self-sharpens is my understanding, as it impacts, which makes it have great penetrating, properties.
And the only weapon systems I'm familiar with, remember, I'm just a stupid civilian diplomat, that use depleted uranium are A-10s, these things that chew up tanks, and tanks, because it's they'll fire a depleted uranium round at another tank, which will just slice through it. So it's possible that in Fallujah, when the Marines went in and they had tanks, it's possible that they used depleted uranium rounds. I don't know why, because HE, there was no reason to use something like that when HE, high explosives, is going to do a much better job than than a Sabot round that just punches through a tank. So I knew this because I'd seen this narrative in Serbia, where we were attributing high rates of children's cancer to the 1999 bombing. Where there was bombing, but there was no depleted uranium bombing, and we didn't use radioactive stuff. And there's other reason why people in Yugoslavia have high rates of cancer. That's because they pumped chemicals into their water, because they had a petrochemical industry and a chemical industry there was no EPA there. Not good.
Wild.
So this was starting to catch hold as a narrative, and it was going to undo a lot of the positive publicity, all the good things we've done in Iraq. So I worked with the Information Warfare and the Public Affairs Office of U.S. Forces Iraq, my boss's outfit, this is how we counter it. And we got to counter it on Twitter. We got to counter it on YouTube. We got to counter it on Facebook. But you can't let it go, because it will gain momentum and it will become accepted truth.
Yep.
And you just can't passively let something like that go without basically discrediting the source and this is, I'm not proud of it, humiliating the person. As you're a Palestinian, what the hell do you know about this stuff? And oh, by the way, Fallujah was also a place where the Iraqis had a chemical industry that dumped water into the groundwater that people were drinking.
Right.
So there's a plausible source for high rates. Oh, by the way, by the way, don't ever go into a tank that's had a depleted uranium round go through it, because it's heavy. It's heavy metal that might be still floating. If you
The dust.
If you breathe it in, it's getting your lungs, and that's not a good thing. It's like,
no, that's bad. I would say, the D rounds are probably worse for the occupants of the armored vehicle that was shot than the long-term exposure of the dust. But, that was like a fantastic segue, Ambassador, into, kind of your time at EUCOM as a deputy there, but also really into Russian mindset, right? I think a lot of folks might not understand. I forget the translation. I think it's active measures, but the Russians put an incredible amount of time and focus and energy on disinformation. And I think many times with the stated goal of really not allowing the recipients of the disinformation to know what is true anymore, so we make poor decisions. And I think, my understanding of their services compared to the volume, potentially that we do in our services, it's like not even close. They put way, way, way more time into that. And I'd be fascinated to hear a few things. First off, you spent a lot of years, dealing with Russia. And how would you characterize, one, the U.S. and NATO's relationship, and two, was this something you guys were dealing with all the time? Because I 100% agree with you. The only way, and this is actually one thing I think is going very well in the Russia-Ukraine, war right now, is I do think the West does have a bit of the upper hand on the narrative and shining a light on what's actually going on. The question is, are those in Russia actually hearing it? Or if they've been so good at kind of tamping down, kind of any independent news sources. It can cut both ways for sure.
Let's start with that and then work my way backward to Nato-Russia.
Yeah.
Right now, the Russian Playbook, which is an old playbook, although it's been dubbed everything from the Gerasimov Doctrine to gray zone warfare, to active measures, whatever. This is old. Right. Whatever came before the KGB back in the old Soviet Union, disinformation, nothing new here. Right. This is an old playbook, and this is where the Russians have had an upper hand because we are bound by our domestic rule of law.
Right.
We don't lie, not very often. We are accountable to Congress, and we are accountable to the court of public opinion here in the United States and in the Western European democracies. And we value the sincerity that when I say something, it is true, despite the old joke that how do you know when a diplomat is lying? Lips are moving.
Right.
Or the British ambassador, back in the 40s, who said a diplomat is somebody sent abroad to lie for his country. I've never lied to anybody, with a few exceptions.
Right.
When it was a tactical, and it was more of a bluff than a lie.
Right.
I never actually told a dishonest thing, but I led people to believe that there was something that wasn't true. But this is where the Russians they've occupied the high ground for the last 15 years in terms of pushing their narrative against democracies where we just we need authorities. If you went to to Lloyd Austin or to General Milley and you said, so have your guys, your cyber warriors, to start lying, putting out false stuff and stuff like that one. That gets very complicated in a hurry, and say congressional oversight means it's probably going to blow back on us too, because we may or may not be very good at it.
Yeah, and legally we can't weaponize our own media in the intelligence services, right? Like the Russians can.
And correct. And one of the problems we have with the State Department, and back to the old U.S. Agency for Information, USIA, was we can only target foreign audiences with our information. We can't even address a domestic audience, unlike the Russians. So Russians have it's unfair advantage because they're in we have bare knuckles and they have a brass knuckles. So it's kind of like, okay, so it just means you got to be smarter, you got to be quicker, you got to be Jack Reacher.
Right.
Let's go there. Or John Wick. After I can't remember whether he ended up getting killed at the end, but whatever. So NATO-Russia, at the time of the breakup of the Soviet Union, there was a kind of the NATO-Russia Founding Act, and then the NATO-Russia Council, and the Russians who like to say that they are very treaty and international legalese oriented. They will always cite a treaty or something to justify what they're doing. As of now they're not. They've thrown away that pretense. But there was, up until the breakup of of Yugoslavia, and then Kosovo declared independence, I think might have been a watershed for them. And then simultaneously, the three Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, joining NATO, plus Czechoslovakia, now Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Hungary, and then Bulgaria and Romania becoming part of NATO. Part of the thing we need to do is always look at it through the other guy's eyes and try to understand, how's he feeling, what's he doing, and for the Russians, and I'm going to be more specific, for Putin, who wants to keep his grasp on power the way it is, he sees this as an existential threat to his ability to preserve his form of governance. Translation: He's large and in charge. He's worth $300 billion. And he's got all these oligarchs around him. And liberal democracy with liberal economics and increasing prosperity and freedom to travel is getting kind of closer and closer, and this makes him very nervous. He doesn't have a buffer anymore, and NATO. So the Russian argument is, and it's not true. It's not in the NATO-Russia Founding Act, that NATO was never going to permanently base forces in any of the former Warsaw Pact republics. Or Soviet republics and Warsaw Pact countries. That they had this fiction in their mind it was never going to happen. I'm not going to relitigate the mistake of not creating an actual defensive arrangement with Russia involving NATO. But there was the NATO-Russia Council, and there's a Russian delegation at NATO. Council hasn't met very often in the last couple of years because of Russia going into Georgia when they did. Was that 2007, and then 2013, 2014 going into Crimea, and then Luhansk and Donetsk in eastern Ukraine, just biting off pieces there. Pretty much screwed that up. But one thing I just want to make really clear, and I know NATO's been very clear about that: NATO is not at war with Russia. Full stop. There's active competition going on, but NATO right now is providing the means for another country being attacked by Russia to defend itself. That is very different. And I want you to think more like Afghanistan when the Soviets were there, than which is why the whole no-fly zone. So for Russia, there's a sense of humiliation. That they are not on a par with the United States. They honestly thought that NATO would dissolve after the Warsaw Pact dissolved. And
really?
NATO.
That's an amazing viewpoint. That's not something I would have ever thought that they would actually believe that. But that's, to your point, seeing through their eyes is really, really critical to understand how to escape, get out of this situation.
So there's a former NATO Secretary General, one of the first ones, who said that, he's quoted on the record as saying NATO's purpose was keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down.
Interesting.
Which, up until about a week ago, was pretty much the case, although the Americans were slowly but surely kind of shrinking and kind of going away. And this is where I've started wondering what Putin is thinking in pulling the trigger when he did. We'll come to that in a second. You can ask me about what is the broader ramifications of this. But then Russia is so pissed off at these former satellites or former republics that they conquered in the course of World War II or in the immediate aftermath of World War II. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia were independent countries before World War II, and they were incorporated as Soviet republics. And this is what I got to jump in on something with, sort of how do we characterize what happened? That's why they decided to go punish the Estonians, even though a quarter of the country of Estonia is actually ethnic Russians, because during the period of the Soviet Union, the Soviets moved people around. So people were moved out of the Baltics and replaced by the Russians, which is kind of interesting. And guess what? Most of the ethnic Russians stayed because life is a lot better in Estonia.
A lot better
than it is for the average Russian, unless you're in the nomenclatura, or you're which is an old Soviet term, or you're an oligarch, or you're part of that class in Moscow or in St. Petersburg, and life is not pretty good. Life is very good.
Life's great.
And stuff like that. So it was kind of like more and more pissed off. And then, so I want you to think of NATO was formed as to be the equivalent of zone defense in basketball.
Right.
Russia is the equivalent of Charles Barkley. Norway
breaking
going
the glass. By the way, Barkley was awesome watching them play, but Russia's sure not watching them play.
Norway going one-on-one against Charles Barkley isn't going to work out well for them.
Right.
But Norway plus 8 or 9 of his friends, including some big ones like Great Britain, France, the United States, suddenly Charles Barkley is thinking, I don't think I want to play with these guys.
Right.
So Putin's grand strategy is, I need to break up the Western alliance. Translation: I need to break up, and I need to drive wedges into NATO. And that's what the whole information operations that he's been doing has gone after the legitimacy of NATO and the legitimacy of the European Union. Well, he's got one notch in his gun on that. And it is well documented that the Russians influenced the Brexit election via social media. Extremely effective, and somebody needs to do a PhD thesis on how they did it.
It's I don't think, I had a long chat with some other former kind of national security types, and you're spot on. Like, this type of disinformation, this has been going on forever. This is like Sun Tzu stuff, right? The difference is the medium to deliver now is a perfect storm. When you have, I mean, when you're interested in a topic, or let's say you politically maybe lean one way or the other, and someone feeds you maybe 85% truth with 15% utter horseshit, and then they can feed it over and over and over and over and over and over again. I mean, I think the Russians did this with, I read a cool article. I think they did this in the 80s with planting the story that the U.S., like basically HIV/AIDS, was, a failed kind of bioweapon thing. Correct. And they planted it in an Indian newspaper. We all thought it was ridiculous, but huge chunks of the rest of the world believed it.
Yep.
And I would agree, it's diabolically effective when done right. And that's one area where I think they have a massive upper hand on us on influence. Well, until a few weeks ago, or a couple of weeks ago.
And of course, we'll see how this ends, and and what comes out at the end. But absolutely right. They drove. It was really interesting. NPR sent a team to a small town in Wales that voted overwhelmingly for Brexit, that had been a beneficiary of large European Union subsidies due to the coal and steel industry having gone out of business in that part of Wales. Right. And the NPR reporter asked, several people on the street, what influenced you to vote for Brexit? And the answer was, well, all the immigrants that are here. And the woman looked around and says, I've been here for a couple of days. I haven't seen a single immigrant. What made you think that? So, well, all the stuff I saw on Facebook. Mm-hmm. It was targeted. It was exquisite. I mean, you got to tip your hat. And then you have to ask the question. This is where I'm going to get myself in really deep trouble. How come the Brits tolerated that interference in their domestic affairs the way they have? Novichok and Skripal. Novichok, a nerve agent that can only come from Russia and is like 40 years old, used on a dissident, in your country, and you're okay with it.
Polonium, and who was it? Litvinenko? Am I remembering that?
You are.
Or am I messing that up?
Yeah, exactly. Litvinenko, poor guy. I mean, so you okay with all that? And we know what the answer is. And this is fun. So John Lewis Geddes is a noted author, historian, who is an expert on the Cold War. And he wrote a wonderful line in one of his books that Stalin was being urged by his generals in 1945 to keep going west. They felt they had momentum and that they could basically conquer Europe and put it under communist rule. And at Yalta, he agreed to basically divide Europe into half, into spheres of influence, because he drank the Kool-Aid on Marxist-Leninist doctrine that when the thing that caused the capitalists to band together, translation Nazi, Hitler and the threat of Nazi Germany was gone, the capitalists would turn on each other and they would fall apart, and eventually Marxist-Leninism would triumph because it's inevitable. Well, it turns out that Stalin was like 70 years premature in his prediction, because the money that Russian oligarchs put into England,
massive,
in my assessment, is a reason why the Brits were very reluctant to do anything that would possibly jeopardize, because they were making money off of it. And this is true for a lot of countries in Europe.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, and I think the oligarchs are now paying the price too a little bit, and having so much money tied up. I just saw I think Chelsea, football soccer teams being put up for sale.
Abramovich, who's not specifically targeted yet by the Brits, knows that that day is probably coming. So he's liquidating his assets and he's getting out of Dodge while it's getting good. So Butler's got a theory of several centers of gravity, and let's go to Sun Tzu again. Centers of gravity for Putin and the Russians. One would be the oligarchs, and so I think I think people are shocked to see how quickly and how extensively the European Union and the United States put together some very far-reaching. I'm astounded. I'm an economist. And you're watching, people having yachts seized in the south of France, villas seized on Lake Como in Italy. Abramovich, looking to offload his the team he poured billions of dollars into. I'm sure the people are panicking in New York and Miami, trying to
Miami for sure.
I've read some stories about a real estate broker who says, they're coming to me saying, list it and listed 25% below market. I want my money. I need it now because the feds.
That could be it that you can get a hold of.
Yeah, get what I can, but having said that, these guys do not want to move back to Moscow or St. Petersburg and live life there. They're enjoying the freedom they have on this side, which is, for all of our faults, there's a reason why people keep coming to our country, including our oligarchs, because life is good on this side of the Atlantic. That's one potential center of gravity. A second one, of course, would be the military. And if anybody thinks that General Shoigu, who is not a professional soldier, he rose to fame.
Yeah, that's what I read about him. He was not at all. Yeah, and he wasn't an intelligence guy either, was he?
No, he ran the Federal Emergency Management Agency in the post-Soviet era, in the breakup, and did a very good job. So he's got management skills. It'd be like putting a U.S. Army logistician in charge of the general staff and go conduct a war. Well, you can't conduct a war without the logistician, but he doesn't understand tactics. So, but by the way, the logistics for what's going on out there is pretty horrific. But here's another center of gravity. So the military right now is embarrassed. This was supposed to have been a walkover, and it's not going well. So interesting question of, does the military get blamed? Do the generals get fired for this? Or do the generals, say, we've had enough of being humiliated like this? It's one thing to go kick ISIS around in Syria, or Chechens in Grozny, or kick some Georgians down when they can't, or grab a pro-Russian enclave called Crimea. That was all pretty easy because it's like us going into Grenada. Although it turned out it wasn't as easy as we thought it was going to be. So and then you have the intelligence community, which apparently did not prepare Putin very well with an assessment of the likelihood that the Ukrainians would actually stand and fight. That's clearly
there was some massive miscalculation there. Massive.
So and the last one is going to be the average Russian. And I've been giving advice of, whatever you do, don't target the average Russian with economic sanctions. Their lives are already miserable. Trust me, the Russian system will do that all on its own. But what got the Russians out of Afghanistan was Russian soldiers coming home in body bags.
Right.
And I tell you right now, what the Ukrainians are doing, you've got 40 million reporters with smartphones and the ability to upload photographs
Yep.
And they are loading social media with pictures of dead, wounded, and captured Russians. Now, I know there's some whining out there about, Geneva Conventions. You have to treat your prisoners and dead with dignity, blah, 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 blah. That's not a war crime. It may be a violation of the Geneva Convention, right. But it ain't a war crime. And and by the way, and I was listening to the Dutch guy that runs Bellingcat. If you're not familiar with them, they do, they do open source analysis, and they're the ones that have pinned polonium, and other things on the Russians. The MH7 shoot down over Ukraine.
Yep.
They
over
put
Ukraine,
that really incredible work on the using just open source phone and stuff like that. Well, right now, what this guy is saying is that there are literally millions and millions of data points that can be used both for historical record, about what actually happened here. And potentially for war crimes, but the biggest impact, and this is why Russia, I think, is just about cut itself off from the international internet. But trust me, people will find a way to get the stuff in, just like in North Korea. Pictures of dead Russians, stories like the Russians are supposedly bringing their own cremation units, because they don't want
forward deployed to not send the bags home. Yeah,
so you don't have a repeat of what happened in Afghanistan.
Right.
But what will happen, and we'll see this pretty soon, is that Russian Orthodox tradition is when a loved one dies, you put a death notice, you post it on the door of your house, you post it on near the church, and you put it on light poles in the neighborhood. We saw that after, you remember the Russians with the Wagner group who got killed in Syria.
And they attacked a forward operation base of us.
Well, the
Russian operations unit, the wrong one to pick a fight with.
The Russian government was kind of like, there's no Russians here. What are you talking about? Well, guess
430 some burning the next day.
Well, guess what? There were 400 plus death notices scattered around Russia. And again, people today are now posting those on vContact and Telegram. Again, social media. So, the genie's out of the bottle in terms of governments being able to control the narrative the way they used to. Yesterday, the new law just went into effect in Moscow, where independent media basically is out of business. Anybody who publishes anything that's critical of the operation in Ukraine is going to go to jail. That hasn't stopped thousands of Russians hitting the street saying, "Why are we doing this to our brothers, the Ukrainians?"
Yeah, I mean, they're half from our cousins, right? They're relatives there. I mean,
this isn't Chechnya.
Yeah, and even the soldiers, I think that's, it's kind of funny when you think about Russian disinformation. They just love flooding the zone, right? And it works. And they did it to the Brits. They did it to us pretty effectively, I think, in our election. Yeah. And the funny thing, though, is the tables have been turned, on them. And it's almost completely overwhelming at this point. I'm not sure that they can ever get that narrative bottled up again. The only view I don't have is how people get their news in Russia, what sources. I think it's a really tricky place. On one hand, you could say, well, one asymmetric or cyber response to them, cut them off from the internet. You can do that by disrupting kind of BGP routes. The problem is, you're not getting data into their citizens. It can harm some intelligence operations, of course. I mean, and so, you touched on something really interesting, which was the long-standing disinformation play the Russians have always done, delivered via, kind of a very efficient medium, being social media and kind of our internet comms. What's your sense of the, kind of modern Russian way of war? Do you expect, an increase in destructive cyber attacks, kind of like NotPetya or some of their wipe ones? Obviously, that's what we do for a living. We stop them every day. In our base, we have not seen a big increase, but I do worry that they've spent a lot of time kind of preparing the virtual battlefield, even though I hate that analogy, in the U.S. And there is no clear red line to me of when you cross the line from a cyber standpoint. The problem with these weapons is when you use them, they don't blow up. They get reverse engineered and someone else has it then.
This is a case where I think there is a red line. And my personal surprise is that Putin pulled the trigger, I think, way too early. Right. The Germans and the current Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, very, kind of like, people are saying he's no Angela Merkel, the Iron Lady who grew up in East Germany. This guy had a different upbringing. He's got a different kind of a government too, with Greens in it. Nord Stream 2 was going to happen,
right?
Which was going to plug, and they were getting rid of their nuclear power plants within 3 or 4 years. Germany would be a vassal to Russian energy. Right. And here's my comment that Russia is basically a gas station masquerading as a nation state. Right. They produce two things: hydrocarbons and guns, weapons. Yeah. Yep. And basically nothing else. Well, if they had a little more patience, if they'd allowed their cyber warriors, their IO people, information operations, the disinformation, if they had kept driving it, sustaining it, creating those false narratives, casting the United States in a bad light, and look, we do a pretty good job of it back here, even before with inflation and truck drivers driving around the Beltway and COVID mass mandate, riots and stuff like that one. There was fertile ground and plenty of ammunition to keep driving wedges into our societies. Right. That's over. The wedges have been absorbed. Yep. The Germans went from, remember I said, keep the Russians out, Americans in, and the Russians down, the Germans down. Yeah. The Germans have stood up. And they've reversed 70 years, how many years it is, 70 years of quiescent, the European Union deal was cut on, to allow Germany back into polite company. The German steel had to subsidize French farmers. That was the fundamental deal with the European Union. And as long as that kept going, everybody was happy. And let the French be the big brains, along with on foreign policy, along with the Brits, and do the military ventures, and the Germans will stay home and not bother anybody. That's over. That era is gone. Right. I've looked at which NATO countries are providing military assistance to Ukraine. Is pretty much almost everybody. Which countries are enacting European Union sanctions is pretty much
the Swiss jumped in.
Who saw that coming? No one saw. Who saw that? Now I'm waiting to see if the International Committee of the Red Cross, actually takes a side. Which is not going to happen. Right. Those guys, I work closely with those guys, and they're incredible. They've got the world's worst job in Ukraine right now because they're the ones that are trying to broker the humanitarian corridors, and they're failing. So right now you've got a nation which is committing, pulled the trigger. So literally 20 years of successful pushing the narrative, breaking up societies. Suddenly, Washington is coalesced around anti-Russia. The European Union has thrown up a wall, and NATO is not going to go to war, but it's going to go help a partner. Right. From Norway, actually, got even the Finns, from Finland all the way down to Turkey. Even Turkey is providing stuff. So if Putin has any advisors, and I wonder if he has any advisors, because there's one speculation that he lives in a bubble. Every picture you see of him, he's at the end of the
table.
There's like this 50-foot long table.
Can you believe that? That's just insane.
Personally, I wonder if there's something there that his doctors have said if he gets COVID, he dies.
Interesting.
I wonder. I can't. This is a guy who, rides horses bare chested, scuba dives, does judo and shit like this, plays hockey for heaven's sakes. So kind of, makes me wonder if there's something there that we don't know about. That's pure speculation.
Something does not add up.
But the Russian way of war was chip away. It costs nothing. And this is the red line piece of it. There's nothing in NATO's Article 5, which is an attack on one would be considered as an attack on all, that embraced the concept of a cyber attack. So, and the thinking around here was if there was a cyber attack that did something like cause the Hoover Dam to collapse and thousands of people to die, and you could actually attribute it to a state actor, then that and it would say Russia, that would constitute an act of war. But sort of ransomware, hacking, a colonial pipeline, shutting down a wastewater plant, having sewage, bubble up and seep. That's
right.
The stuff that they were doing to the Baltics never reached the level because we learned to counter it. We learned to deal with it.
Right.
As you said, we reversed engineer. We figured out how to get back at us. So the Russian way of war was very patient. I thought very effective, and quite frankly, I worried that together with the Chinese was going to prevail over. I've read one article that we're talking about the end of liberal democracy, and
Sure.
for listeners, when we say liberal, we're not talking Democrats and left. We're talking about our way of democracy, where one vote, one person, one vote, and peaceful change of government and stuff like that. But God, I'm flabbergasted at a loss for words because now you're going to ask me the question of, so what do we think the end game is going to be? What do you think?
That is exactly where I was going. What's the end game? How do we get out of this? And
what's the offer?
What is another Sun Tzu? I'm probably going to mess this up, but a golden bridge to retreat over.
There
is a risk of backing someone way into a corner where I think that kind of gave rise to Hitler, as at least some of history shows. Their economy was crushed. It's usually when totalitarian leaders, they're the greatest turnaround artists, and then they crater after that. But how do we navigate out of this without World War III? Because I do personally think Putin has a lower threshold for use of nuclear weapons in a tactical environment, but I don't even want to talk about that or even go there. It's horrible to think about. But you have more experience than most people in this world at dealing with this part of the world. I'm dying to know how you think we solve this.
So there's a book written by a guy named Larry Bond called Red Phoenix, and he was a contemporary and actually kind of on the same academic team as the guy who did Red Storm Rising. Forgive me for not remembering his name. It posits a war on the Korean Peninsula back when it's still the Soviet Union, around there, and the war ends basically when the Chinese intervene, and change the government in North Korea, and then sort it all out. China right now so the further east you go, the more face becomes important.
Right.
We Americans, I had a Dane who watched me play golf once and asked me why I was willing to humiliate myself the way I did. And my answer was, I'm an American. That's what we do.
We're okay with that.
I'm okay with being a terrible golfer, but no Dane would ever go out and do something that he or she wasn't very good at.
Right.
If you corner a tiger, you better be prepared to put the tiger out of his misery, or be prepared for the tiger to put you out of your misery. And just exactly what you said. So Putin has put himself into a corner right now where he has to win. He has to prevail in Ukraine. Maybe he only grabs the eastern 2/3 of the country, and kind of draws a line at Kiev, and lets go of the stuff that's further to the west. Which kind of, by the way, goes back to and somebody was asking me about, well, isn't this just like, when the Nazis, in 1939 went into Sudetenland and they claimed they're Germans there, that was their excuse for going in. Well, they forgot that there was a party to that, and it was called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And Molotov, the predecessor of Sergei Lavrov, the current foreign minister, cut a deal with the Germans that the Soviets could grab, the Baltics plus part of Poland. So the western part of Poland, western part of Ukraine, most of that used to be Poland,
right?
And after the war, the Russians just hung on to it. That was the deal that Franklin Roosevelt cut at Yalta. So the excuse that we're going to protect Russians there, well, the Russians are all in the eastern part, but the Ukrainians are brothers. But what's the face-saving way for Putin to say he got what he needed, short of a change in leadership at the top of Moscow? And this is where my advice has been: the threshold for employment of a nuclear device has gotten a lot lower than it was 2 weeks ago, just because he's in a hard place. But if we kind of keep the temperature low, keep feeding, keep giving the average Ukraine a reason to resist and to fight, as in Afghanistan, the closer we're going to get to the day when a guy named Vladimir Putin is not in the Kremlin anymore. And among the things that I see happening, and this is probably going to happen in the next day or two, the European Union will agree to give Ukraine a path to European Union membership, basically declare them a candidate country.
Right.
Won't give them membership. That's complicated, but open the door, put a light behind it, and say, we're keeping the light on, and you someday, sooner than later, we hope you will become a member of the European Union. And this would, I think, be incredibly reassuring and give cause for people to make life miserable for the Russians. And then what we're hearing from the Russian soldiers that are going in, one, they're scared shitless, they're hungry, they're tired, haven't had a shower in a while. And
didn't know why they were going in the first place.
And they know that every person around them is potentially an assassin. Mm-hmm. That sucks. That is what happened to us in Iraq in 2005, 2006 with the Sunni insurgency, with Al Qaeda. And what happened to the Russians, the Soviets back in the day in Afghanistan. It will be their fate, because the only way he prevails right now is he's going to have to level Odessa. And by the way, if there was a place that you might see like a tactical nuke used, that would be an interesting place to use it in the close proximity, because one, it's not an attack on NATO. But having said that, the worldwide repercussions, this would drive the Chinese absolutely bonkers. Yeah. Last thing China can afford to have is somebody on their periphery, using nuclear weapons. I think the threshold's gone down, which is why we have to be very careful and this is what we're not very good at. We need to be patient. Yeah. We need the IO side of it, dominate the narrative, keep pushing the narrative, keep putting pressure on friends and allies of Putin. One of my personal favorites right now is there's a guy who plays for the Washington Capitals that on his Instagram page, he's got a picture of him and Putin. Yeah. I tell you right now, I won't buy a ticket to go to the Capitals and watch a guy who is an over, out of the closet Putin supporter. No question. I would like to see that gentleman take that picture down. And I would be good with that, because that would send the message of this isn't about us against Russia. This is about us and Putin, because this is Putin, and this is the same problem. You're driving in the corner. So I think there's a red line back to your cyber piece of it. I think right now I'm a little bit surprised that we haven't seen some serious cyber activity. Maybe we have, we just don't know about it. But I'm thinking that the threshold for NATO to respond directly to Russia, especially in this, the cyber war, which is, for the average American, the average person, is invisible. You don't feel it until Colonial Pipeline shuts down, exactly, or your dam fails, or your power grid goes out in the middle of winter, or something like that one. I think they would see that as maybe the red line they can't cross, because you got to think about it. That goes both ways. It's one thing to muck with us and steal our money and stuff like that one. But they know what we could do to them. Right. That could go both ways. So suddenly, and then now you have an escalating cyber war where suddenly, both countries are literally and figuratively in the dark.
That's the problem. That's what I was going to say is I think I could see them play the game in local municipalities, regional things. But that's not going to, or just take the gloves off on their kind of, criminal groups. Cause I still, I don't have any intelligence to back this up, but I still believe the Russian intel services will leverage and tolerate some of their kind of ransomware groups to do a little bit of their dirty work for them. It just makes sense to me. The funny thing though, is the Conti group, the Conti ransomware syndicate, which is probably one of the biggest ones, pledged allegiance to Russia at the beginning of this, not realizing, remember, these are like syndicate groups. So a lot of these will work where they'll say, hey, you need to bring a pelt in. Like, you need a big victim. You need to be Russian speaking. We'll let you into the fold, and you can use our tools and our kind of infrastructure. It's almost like a franchisee model. Well, they didn't realize how many Ukrainian cyber criminals they had, which immediately resulted in a leak of all of their training, their playbooks, a year's worth of chat logs from within the group. And, we actually saved 2 companies Friday and Saturday. All new tactics we're seeing now by some of the groups, just because a lot of that playbook has been outed. So it's been really interesting to kind of watch how it's gone down. But, kind of back to Putin, I would say the other area, it's kind of hard drawing red lines in cyber because it's so, it's, to be candid, it's really hard to pull off an attack that wipes out a whole power grid. We watched Russia do that to Ukraine back in, I think, 2014. The reality is it was like a 6 to 12 hour outage for 230,000 people. It was like, it scared everyone to death. But when you actually break down the attack and then look at the net result, we have thunderstorms that do way worse, way worse, like all day long. The part of the infrastructure I worry about that I think, the government should at least address or draw a red line is on our internet service providers, because they're the glue that makes everything else work. And no one talks about this. And it's actually one of the areas I always worry about. The Chinese, in my opinion, tend to telegraph some of their interests in cyber because their guys write basically, kind of publish, scientific articles. Right. And a lot of times they show their hand on techniques we'll see, in the wild. In one area, they definitely focus on something called BGP, manipulation border gateway protocol. And this is the protocol that internet service provider speaks to other internet service provider. And when that gets disrupted, like, really bad things happen, right? A lot of times when you see massive outages, it's usually a networking issue. Right. And so that's the area. So, I hope they see those as red lines as well, because I think that would definitely be a red line. And, when you go into shutting everything's stuff down, destroying it, now either side doesn't even know the intentions. That's when it gets really dangerous to me. So, hopefully we're all collectively, smarter than to blind ourselves to 2 massively armed nuclear foes' intentions.
So let me do a little red teaming here.
Sure.
This. And the red teaming is gas is over $5 a gallon right now.
Yeah.
Truckers are driving around the Beltway, and some of them are probably going to drive downtown tomorrow. You've got, we're just in the primary season right now. Jobs, American economy is doing pretty well. The job report was really good on Monday. Inflation's way too high. If I'm a Russian, I says, what is President Biden's center of gravity? What are any European Union center of gravity? And the answer is, the next election that's coming up. How would you make an American's life miserable? And the answer is, when you start getting, one answer could be, well, when you start getting Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 CEOs calling up the White House and saying, shit, I just got screwed. I got a ransomware, something just happened to me. So, what they've been doing, except as, for the most part, it's been ransom for hire. There's been a profit motive for it. But what if you weaponize it where it now becomes, a lot more sustained, and maybe you start going after some of the banks, and it's annoying. But it's disruptive, and it doesn't rise to a level where somebody up at Fort Meade says, okay, now we got to go, sort of fry somebody, whatever they do, whatever those. We'll
never talk about it.
So to fess up, I gave up computer programming after COBOL. So it's right. So I'm pretty much, I'm a digital immigrant and not a digital native. So right. But I'm an economist, and I'm an economist. I'm thinking, so what would cause? How would you inflict economic pain, which we're about to do to ourselves? So if we actually cut off, Russian oil, which, by the way, like 80% of it transits the Baltics, so that wouldn't be actually all that hard to shut that off. We're going to see $8 a barrel, and how long do you think the average American is prepared to. So if I'm an American, if I'm the CIO of any company, on the assumption the company actually has a CIO and it hasn't outsourced their IT back, the back office. Right now, I'd be thinking, how do I button up? How do I lock my shit down?
Yeah.
How do I refresh? How do I do the annual cyber training that I do for the government that everybody understands? Because phishing is going to get somebody. There's going to be that Walmart gift card if you just click here. Bullshit
for sure. Yeah.
I just flushed my my spam folder. It had 700 emails in it. Half obscene, half dangling money. Really, guys. But my next door neighbor up in Maine, honest to God, thought he had won $1 million. He'd gotten a phone call. He has a computer, but he doesn't use it very well. He got a phone call. He won $1 million, and all he had to do was go down to the bank and get $1,000 to pay for the expenses. Well, luckily, there's a neighbor who checks in on him periodically. This guy's in his 80s, and said, Bruce, you have not won $1 million. That you're never going to win. Have you bought a lottery ticket? Show it to me.
Yep.
And it took the better part of a couple hours for them to convince him that he was being scammed. This is just way too easy.
This is con man with a better delivery platform. It's been happening forever. Also on this front, I think you're right. That's the area. This isn't something I've spoken publicly about too much, but the 3 months leading up to our election, we had a 2,000% increase in responses. And when I say response, what we do is when we see a bad guy, we take him out proactively in the network. And we had a 2,000% increase. And it was a lot in just local municipalities, schools, that type of stuff is where we really saw it. And then right after election, it cratered. And I have no idea for the date, December 27th that year, went back up, and then it's increased steady state. The pandemic really obviously, caused a pretty big increase in activity. And, there's also just some bad vulnerabilities that really enabled this at a larger scale. So that's why I tell everyone, listen, most people won't be targeted. However, you need to use this as an excuse to plan for and have an assume a breach mentality. It's all about assuming when they get in, not if. And that's not to spread, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I don't believe in that. We're pragmatists, out of this old world and, kind of apolitical. And I really think that it's just a good time to, operate and do that kind of tabletop exercise of what would I do if a bad guy gets in. And then the other kind of dirty secret in this game, like a lot of things, if you want to be elite at it, is details absolutely matter, because that's what the bad guys take advantage of. And so there's some nice frameworks to look at the world through, but it's a good time to prepare, because I think you nailed it. He was backed into the corner in his mind, wherever he's getting his info. And then he lashed out at Ukraine, right? And now he actually looks worse and weaker. They just have this nuclear sword they can keep, waving around, and they have their asymmetric means, which I think a lot of their nation state ones are still tied up hitting Ukraine right now. And at some point they might forget it. We're just going to bomb them anyway, and then turn their attention to the U.S. That's a little bit of my fear, I think, to your point of, kind of how they can increase pain. But at some point there's got to be an off ramp, which I think, as hard as it is to watch everything that's going on, we have to be incredibly patient with a cornered, powerful animal, really.
And here's my concluding thought is this is going to hurt us morally to watch what the Russians are going to do to the Ukrainians who resist. Yeah, it's going to be ugly. Their nice Russian approach, because they expected flowers, didn't work out. Now it's going to be what they did to the Syrian opposition, Aleppo, what they did in Chechnya. Grozny. I wonder what Grozny looks like today. And the calls to for no-fly zones and to intervene will be there. And this is an administration, I'm going to say this very carefully, that there are persons in the administration, not elected, but appointed, who are responsible for what happened in Libya. Mm-hmm. Libya was easy because, let's face it, we could whack the Libyan Air Force out and pay no consequences for it, except we're still paying for the consequences of what happened in Libya. Right. We did just like Putin. We didn't have a plan B when Gaddafi got killed. Right. And ISIS-K, ISIS, Boko Haram, guns flowing all over the place. That was just unbelievable what happened. And the persons that were responsible for that decision without thinking, and the goal was to save 30,000 people in Benghazi. Well, I suspect we've had probably 300,000 people die as a result of us saving 30,000. Now we have, and I'm glad I'm not a decision maker. There's 45, 46, 47 million people in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. There's 1.5 million that have left the country. Before this is over, we may have 5 or 6 million people flooding Europe. This is World War II on steroids. World War II. Refugees, refugee flows on steroids. Mm-hmm. And we need to be able to swallow hard and accept the suffering, one, because we don't want nuclear war, and do what we can to inflict enough pain on the adversary so that he decides, he's got what he wanted and he goes home, or there's a change of government. And then we have to sit down and figure out, okay, what do we do next? We don't have a repetition of this. Because clearly Moscow has some things that in its mind are legitimate, and we don't have to agree with it, but we have to understand that perspective. On the cyber world of it, we need a rules of the road, I think, which have probably gradually come up over time. I think there may be some, tacit understandings amongst our various services. But this Wild West stuff that we've dealt with over the last 20 years, and Russians going in and doing stuff, the things they've been doing. Right. We have to roll in the Iranians. You got to roll in the Chinese, plus some non-state actors that also have the ability, plus some allies who also probably freelance and like to make a little bit of money out of this. That's going to be the way forward. But we're going to have to be. If we don't offer Russia something, and what that is, I don't know. I would like to pull it. We made a mistake of letting him into the world economy the way we did. For better or for worse. I mean, they've got energy, they got nukes, but they have a shrinking population, and it's shrinking by the day, literally, probably by several hundred young men who would otherwise be producing children are not going to be. So 20 years from now, there's going to be a hit in their birth rate. Yeah, there's a thought.
Yeah, none of them are good choices. I mean, that's I think why this is. Everyone I talked to and from my previous life, it's a very concerning situation because there isn't a very clear, hey, we do X, Y, and Z and we can get out of this jam. I agree. Kind of strategic patience is going to be key, and then making it. Hence the title of this podcast, The Most Unfair Fight, that we can, or at least enable there without it turning into World War III. Because, a cornered beast is dangerous for sure. You either got to kill it fully or figure out a way to diffuse it. So
it's like when they capture those wolves or bears and they tranquilize them and they put them in the cage. When the tranquilizer wears off and they release them in the wild, it's really exciting to watch the guys that have to open
open the cage and get out of the way,
and hope the bear just kind of keeps going that way.
Absolutely. Well, Ambassador Butler, it's been absolutely wonderful to hear from you over this past almost 2 hours. We need more folks like you, kind of. Engaged in this with the amount of experience you have. This is I think probably one of the more dangerous times that, at least in obviously my time, I think geopolitically we're dealing with. So hopefully we can squeak out of this and protect ourselves in the meantime. With that, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
No, I appreciate it being an opportunity to be with you.
All right, thank you very much.
Cheers.